And we are here. It is day 2 for us, or day 3. I know they all kind of blur together, but we're at RSA Conference 2019 with Mark Dufresne. He's the VP of Research at Endgame. No stranger to the show, of course. Mark, welcome.
All right, thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to have you here. We've got a few topics to cover that I think are very interesting, and I think it's, certainly the first one is something that our audience really thinks about a lot and I think struggles with a lot, and that is, how do they get an independent evaluation? I think it's one of the reasons they listen to us, because we give independent evaluations of our vendors, even if they're a sponsor. If we don't like something, we'll tell you, right?
Yeah, we appreciate that.
And we'll be very frank and transparent with our conversations, and that's why our listeners listen to us. And there have been 2 independent, I think, evaluations in the endpoint security space. So the first was from Forrester.
Yeah, so Forrester just came out last week with an evaluation of the MITRE sort of post-compromise breach detection results. I think there's been a couple of times on your show, MITRE has come up lately in the attack matrix in general.
Yeah.
MITRE did a really nice job evaluating 7 plus 2 now. A couple of competitors came in a little bit later into the evaluation, but put out some raw information, which intentionally MITRE didn't want to score vendors. MITRE didn't want to provide rankings. MITRE simply said, hey, this is what attack is. These are some techniques we've seen used by APT3 in the past. We've simulated generating those techniques and endpoints, and just here's how these different products approached detection, correlation, alerting on those different techniques. But they didn't provide really a basis for scoring, which left a very predictable vacuum that was quickly filled by vendors rushing in to all declare that they were the best,
right.
And do sort of a victory lap, and leaving consumers, I think, not too much better off in terms of how they can actually interpret these results and make any kind of use of it.
Unless they went and read all the results themselves and would draw their own conclusions, which I think is what MITRE wanted people to do, which is okay.
Yeah, I mean, they were coming from it from a good spot where they didn't want to be the arbiter of right and wrong. It's a really nuanced problem, and different products truly do approach the problem differently. And so they didn't want to be in a position to declare a winner. I mean, they were like, that's as unbiased as you can get.
Right.
But it did leave this gap, and we were really happy that Josh at Forrester came in and did pretty good of look across the results and describe at a really high level, a usable level, some of the important things he took away from that evaluation as a third-party player. And it was, pretty. It was a positive thing. He didn't trash anybody. He didn't say anyone was really way worse or way better than anybody else, but he really did a good job sort of highlighting how different products were better in the evaluation.
Well, and I think that's important to understand the strengths of each of the vendors, in an unbiased kind of format. I mean, it is nice to kind of see, when I look at product reviews for other products outside of security, it's kind of nice to see the pros and cons, right?
Yep.
The cons are typically written, though, not to be, inflammatory, right? And I think everyone has a different appetite, a different architecture, and different requirements that having that information may lead them down the right path.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, because post-compromise visibility, what does detection mean post-compromise? I mean, the particular test, for example, it used a lot of if you would just turn alerting on in your enterprise for many of the tests that they used during the eval, your SOC would just hate you. They would all turn it off. They would just look away. They would throw your product out to the street. So I don't want an alert every time somebody runs net use in my environment. But that's exactly the level of fidelity that some of the tests were using. And so, with the way we approach our product, and it definitely came out in the evaluation. We try to sort of give our think about an out-of-the-box thing that's going to work in most enterprises. Let's alert on things that are on the higher confidence end. Of course, with customers can tune things on and off, whitelist normal activity. And some things really do just belong in the universe of telemetry. So when we're there, we try to provide enrichments, start answering, what is this? Why does net use important? What MITRE technique does that map to? And tie it to things that might be bad, which MITRE called taint. In Josh's analysis, it talked about correlation. But it's important that it's not just, the problem with post-compromise detection, you don't want to just dump a mountain of telemetry in somebody's lap and say, good luck figuring out how any of this means anything. The MITRE evaluation did a nice job talking about how different vendors sort of tied those threads together for people and told more of a story of an attack. And enrich
rather than
properly.
just like one part of the, because a lot of the MITRE is like one square is like just one part of an attack.
Sure. Yeah, and attacks all, as you know, tie together. I mean, there's a chain of events from initial access all the way through to actions on objective, collection, exfil, damage and loss, whatever sort of the adversary's intent is. So you have to chain that together in a good modern like EDR tool.
And now NSS Labs also had an evaluation of Endpoint Protection Guide is what they called it.
Yeah, they just released that this morning on the first day of RSA. That was the MITRE eval is all about one half of what the modern endpoint security tool needs to provide, which is visibility and like correlation and detection post compromise. I mean, I think we all say we have to assume that somebody's going to click on a fish, a piece of malware is going to evade your AV product, somebody's going to get legitimate creds and go do things on your network that are bad. So MITRE is all about sort of categorizing those attacks, and the evaluation talked about products, their effectiveness in dealing with that side of the problem. The NSS test is more along the lines of what we all think about when we think about like an AV product. It's sort of more in your set and forget AV type solution, where they did a good job this year in their testing, trying to simulate real attacks like unknown malware that somebody might bring in that just looking it up in VT is not going to do you any good. If you're simply running traditional AV based or signature based AV, it's not going to find those things. It
it sounds like they went the extra mile of not just finding like off the shelf malware and detonating it. They found some different strains of malware that
did some customization.
Cool.
Sort of did some custom payloads and macros. They disconnected the endpoint under test from the cloud. I mean, a lot of cloud-based security is important. It's part of a solution, but you really do have to think about your disconnected assets. Like, do you have protection when things are offline? How does that equate to your online protection? So they did some testing around when the endpoint is offline, how does this solution fare? And I also think another big deal is like, how much does this thing cost to actually deploy and maintain? How false positive prone is it? Like, you can write a machine learning model that's going to just say every executable is bad, but that's not going to really perform particularly well. So they also have their test is interesting in that they try to think about what's the cost of ownership and operating this thing going to be, which is really like a third dimension as you're actually thinking about implementing a tool. Is like, how hard is this thing to run, and how much is this going to cost me over time? What are all those hidden costs? They try to pull that together, which is a hard thing to do, and map it along with effectiveness.
Now, how are CISOs looking at this particular level of evaluations from MITRE and Forrester and NSS Labs? How are they digesting that and making sense of it to ultimately make decisions about their security programs?
Yeah, I mean, like it is. There's no better reminder than coming to RSA just how many vendors are out there and how much all of the words coming out of the marketing departments of these companies, they all sound the same. So how do you everyone's got next generation advanced AI-driven ML, behavioral detection. Everybody's perfect. Everyone's got a slick demo. So it's really hard for a team with limited resources. I mean, they can't possibly bring in and do like a proof of concept trial of every endpoint security product in the market. So these tests, the NSS test is in a good example of something that says, hey, if the product if they were tested and performed well, it's a legitimate protection solution. Like they tested it probably as well or better than your team is going to be able to test it in a couple-week trial period when they've got a day job. So it's sort of like it's important to be there, be present, be transparent, and bring that in. So NSS and some other we do AV comparatives testing, for example, another third-party sort of protection testing firm. Those are all good, like baseline. Is this thing going to help me keep threats out? The MITRE test was really interesting because CISOs, they all know they need protection. They're all becoming enlightened to the fact that, signature-based solutions aren't good enough. I think in 2019, where everyone kind of knows that, MITRE is the framework people are thinking about when they think about, hey, what do I post-compromise detection and visibility? I know that's important. It's really hard to measure that. And so the MITRE eval and the Forrester independent study, we're seeing a lot of CISOs talking about those results, and it's becoming a place where they can sort of contextualize what is this new universe of assume I'm breached, post-compromise detection, how quickly can I figure out the scope of an intrusion and figure out what I have to do to remediate it? What are all the artifacts left behind? What did the adversary do? MITRE and Forrester is something CISOs are really they're looking at that, just thinking like, okay, this is the type of information I start to need to make this whole amorphous concept of attack a little bit more actionable. Like, what do I need to be thinking about?
Because I think in the past it was just probably folks like you and I going, there's a lot of evasion techniques out there, and there's a lot of things that people can do to be super stealthy in your network, and you're going to miss that. That message, I feel like, was lost for so many years until we had some of these independent evaluations and guidelines like MITRE ATT&CK to allow CISOs to go, that's what you're talking about. Like, it actually maps out to different behaviors.
And it's still not. It's still only a slice of the pie they need to care about.
Agree.
Like, I wrote a blog post right after the eval. My team at Endgame did the evaluation. We were right there with MITRE, and it's not everything. For example, it didn't talk about which things should belong in a real enterprise in the universe of alerting versus just make sure I can go query for this thing and find it and tie it together, but I don't want alerts on net use or anytime PowerShell runs. I don't need an alert for that. It doesn't talk about things like hardening of your data source. Like, I think we all know how easy it is to undermine if you're just sitting in user mode and just sucking in Windows event logs or ETW feeds from userland. It's extremely easy for somebody to subvert that if they're active on a box and just blind your EDR solution. So quality of data, and things like, how easy is this thing for me to deploy? What's the CPU impact on the endpoint and memory impact? How performant is it? How good's your customer support? There's all kinds of other things that CISOs need to think about when they're evaluating a product. So it's kind of one important aspect.
But they all feed into the increased detection rate in my mind, right? Having a vulnerability management background, sure, it's one thing to compare how many vulnerabilities does it find. It's another thing to see how it fits into my process to be able to respond fast.
Yeah, and it's sort of like your table stakes for being a serious somebody should consider bring in. And if you look at the MITRE evaluation results in Forrester, you probably want to be plucking out a company that looked really good in that aspect of things. Get that third party as a starting point. You want to look at something like NSS and say, hey, does this company have a credible prevention solution? Can I set things and it's going to block 99% of threats, and then sort of bring those in for a trial, make sure those usability features are in place, make sure it's performant before, and then make your buying decision.
So what are some of the barriers to effective enterprise security? And that's a loaded question. We could go in a lot of different places. Yeah, right, exactly.
So, I guess two big classes we think about. We're trying to build a product that helps solve this problem, and it is a big thing, but it's really, there's a technology problem and kind of a people, and I'd say almost almost the same thing as the people problem is the usability problem. Does your technology have the baseline protection capabilities? Can it do behavioral detection versus relying on signatures or cloud lookups? You have to have, we think all the time about layered behavioral detections, expecting and knowing based on history and the fact that we have aggressive adversaries constantly changing their tactics to evade defenses. We know I've got 7 layers between them and success, and I know if it's an APT level threat, they're probably going to do something that's going to evade one of my layers, but I just have to have something in place to just provide blocking and detection and, very rapid remediation at some phase.
I guess what you're saying is attackers are going to gain a foothold. It's about how deep you let them go and how quickly you can find them. And one thing that we've been talking about that's kind of interesting, Mark, is that advanced attackers have more than one way in to your enterprise. And when we start thinking about it and I put my evil hat on, I'm like, I would totally have multiple footholds. So if one gets burned, I just go to the other.
And that is we've seen that time and time again. And you think remediation is done. You did a credential reset somewhere, and there's something sitting on a network device somewhere, nascent backdoor beaconing back home once a month. Right. Just low and slow. So it is. Once you've given the adversary the opportunity to sort of embed your fingers into your enterprise for a long period of time and have time to think about things like persistent access to your environment. It's
an
practically game
attacker,
over.
It's very difficult.
And that is why rapid detection and response capabilities are so important, because even if they manage to get a foothold, they get an account, they log in, they start doing stuff. If you can find them early, you kind of don't offer them the chance to take a breath and think about those things like establishing.
Now, how do we find the talent to detect stuff like this in our networks, given that there's a talent shortage, as it were, but
Yep.
I think there's also a lot of companies that are forward-thinking, hiring people and training them.
Yep.
Like, you have the right mindset, you don't
Yep.
have the right skill set yet, but we can
Right.
teach you that, right?
Yeah, we can teach you that, and yeah, I think we try to think a lot about. We want a usable product. We have APIs and really advanced query capabilities for power users. Love that stuff, but we do think about at my company, Endgame, we have a large base of customers in the DoD. Where there's 19-year-old kids, kind of 6 weeks of training. They probably have some cybersecurity interest, and they played at home with computers, but they haven't been in a SOC before,
right.
and they've got to be able to use the tool. So we think about how can I. It's kind of like the detection and prevention thing. The what do I do next problem is something we think a lot about, and how can we help educate and point people in the right direction.
Well, you have the chat interface,
right?
To your
That's
product,
one really
which
good
is very,
example.
a
that
unique
we've got.
differentiator.
Yeah,
for you,
we built that kind of. I think we've been seeing this problem for a long time, and it is kind of because of this, like some of our military partnerships we've got, where it's young people. They want to sit down at our terminal and be able to ask questions of the data within minutes. I mean, hey, like search all my endpoints for whether xyz.exe ran, enter, and it'll go out. You don't need to write like Lucene syntax and go bang your head against the wall and go check out man pages or help guides
I've been
to
there.
put together a query. Yeah, it can be really miserable. So that's really important for usability, but it's also like in the presence of an alert, okay, well, what questions am I supposed to ask next? How do I scope this incident? How do I tie things together in a reasonably usable graphical interface? How do I provide, it's natural to say, okay, this process is running. I can see it visually. I want to be able to click on it. Maybe dump its memory right from a console. Lead people along a path. We don't want to force them on a guide rails. Like there's full power there to do whatever they want, but we want, there's a lot of best practices out there. We want to learn from that and kind of put these capabilities right in the product, so we start to overcome some of those usability challenges and get people contributing on a team within hours or maybe a couple of days if they're a little slow compared to weeks or months. Yeah. Because then you're the guy you trained for 3 months,
right? And
he suddenly gets to put I know Splunk on my resume. He's got 20 recruiters hitting him up on LinkedIn every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's almost, you have to assume that your talent, you're going to have turnover. So if you're constantly spending a third of your time with a new employee on training, and then they're going to go out the door, and 8 months later, that's a really tough thing to sustain.
But giving them a way to be effective and have them feel effective from day one with the interfaces you built into Endgame's product, I think is a great story.
I've got a pretty substantial data science team, and I think we see a lot of companies talking about AI, machine learning powered prevention and behavioral detection, and look at this, we found this anomaly. I've got 40 to 50% of those brain cycles thinking about usability as opposed to detection and prevention. I mean, that's important. Detection and prevention, it's not a solved problem. We're innovating all the time, but we've got a fantastic solution there. But I think where we're really offering a lot of how do you separate from the noise in the industry? It's having the usability features baked in that I think is a really powerful thing. If I want to help our users solve security problems, investing there is really high impact.
Right. Awesome. Mark, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul. Great talking to you.